Joining us now is Dr. Gad Saad, a great friend of mine, visiting professor and global ambassador at Northwood University, author of The Sad Truth About Happiness and the Parasitic Mind. Dr. Saad, great to see you.
How are you, sir?
So, Dr. Saad, I'm doing well. You were the first guest that we thought of someone who could really speak truth to power about what we're seeing in New York and a broader takeover of the West by Islam. And I said something yesterday. I said, look, it doesn't feel right or seem right that the West is quickly being taken over. Both London and New York are going to have Muslim mayors and having third world immigration that has made that possible. Dr. Saad, how should we think about all of this?
Look, Islam, like any ideology, has certain defining tenets, some of which might be perfectly consistent with our values, but many of which, regrettably, are perfectly inconsistent with our values. So, take, for example, Sharia law, which is Islamic law. It purports that the severity of a punishment depends on the identity of the perpetrator and of the victim. In that sense, it couldn't be any more antithetical to American jurisprudence, which basically says that Lady Justice has to be blind. And so the people who say, hey, all religions have good and bad, I mean, in a very idiotic sense, that's true. But, Jains, people who practice Jainism, are extremely pacifist, so much so that when they walk down the street, they use a broom so that they don't inadvertently step on any ants. Regrettably, Islam is not as peaceful as Jainism, and therefore we must make sure to let in people who share our values.
But why is this so complicated? And so why is it that secular Westerners, especially in New York, go out of their way to try to elect someone like Mamdani, who has by no way whatsoever could you say this guy is a believer in Western values? What drives that?
So, I mean, there are several reasons, one of which is so Islamophilia, the love of Islam, stems from several, parasitic ideas, one of which is that Islam, because it is in the minority status in the West so far, it is viewed as the underdog. And of course, progressives, with their suicidal empathy, love to view the underdog as downtrodden, and therefore we need to protect it. Of course, what they don't know is that Islam is the majority position in 56 countries that constitute the Islamic organization, the IOC. OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And so therefore they have this reflex, right? The noble Gazans are the sweet boys, the Israelis are the mean guys. And so that just comes from the reflexive bent of progressives to always go for the minority.
And so what further about Islam do you wish or want Westerners to know about? Do you think that Islam is compatible with Western civilization?
The short answer, no. Of course, millions of Muslims decide to ignore the incongruent elements of their religion. They're practicing cafeteria Islam, right? They're choosing the parts that they agree with, and they're ignoring the parts that they don't agree with. But once Islam becomes, never mind a majority, if it becomes a strong minority, we have 1400 years of history that tells us what happens to all of the foundational values that we hold dearly in the West, right? I mean, you don't have to, believe me, you could just study history, right? I mean, almost every single one of the 56 countries that I mentioned a few minutes ago started off with having zero Islam. And then you close and open your eyes, suddenly it's 99.9% Islam. How did that happen? In some cases, it takes 5 years for it to happen. In some cases, it takes 500 years to happen. But inshallah, it will always happen. I'll mention one other thing. Many of your viewers may not know this. Since 9/11 alone, Charlie, so that's 24 years, there have been 47,000 plus terror attacks committed by Islamic terrorists in nearly 70 countries. And now there are multiple databases that you can use to prove that this number is correct. 47,000 terror attacks. So that should give you a sense of whether Islam is compatible with the West or not.
So, why is it that so many Muslims are moving to Western countries? Is it just economics, or is there something more ideological at play here?
It's both. Of course, many Muslims have no interest in conquering anyone, and they want, as you just said, exactly what you said, which is I want better economic opportunities for me and my children and so on. But the Muslim Brotherhood and many other Islamic theorists and scholars and politicians have said that we will conquer the West through three means, and I hope that your listeners and viewers take note. Number one, we will conquer the West through the womb of our women, right? So that's a demographic fertility battle. We will produce five children, you will produce 1.2 children, and we will outbreed you. Number two, we will conquer the West through hijrah. Hijrah is the Arabic word for immigration, and that's exactly what we do with our open border policies. And number three, we will conquer the West by using your miserable freedoms and liberties against you. They're screaming this out from the top of the mountain, and yet most Westerners choose to ignore it, Charlie. It is so galling. It is so frustrating. I escaped that world 45 plus years ago, and here it is now hunting me down 50 years later.
And it's what can we do to fortify ourselves against this? And mass immigration leads to bad policies. You become what you import. And I know that you're working on a book called Suicidal Empathy, but help me further understand the fortification strategy to help prevent this.
Well, demography is indeed destiny, right? I mean, a culture is defined by the values that the majority of people share in that culture. Cultures are not all equal, right? Cultures that throw gays off rooftops are not as good as cultures that don't. Cultures that don't engage in female genital mutilation of their little girls are not as good as cultures that don't, and so on and so forth. So cultures have values, religions have values. It is perfectly reasonable for a host society to say, you're only welcome here as long as you completely reject some of the values that are antithetical to ours. If yes, welcome in, my brother. If no, stay from where you came from. I mean, it's as simple as that. But again, Charlie, the reflex in the West, hence parasitic mind and suicidal empathy, people in the West have been taught that it is gauche, it is callous to ever criticize someone's religion. And that's what makes most Westerners so impotent to ever criticize Islam because they say, well, I've got my religion, they have theirs. Who am I to judge them? Well, you should judge if those values are inconsistent with those that you hold dear.
And people in the West assume that Western values are universal, and they're not. What in particular makes Islamic values incongruent with Western values? What are the specifics you would say?
Well, there are many, but one of which, so look, all Abrahamic faiths have a coalitional psychology, us versus them, right? The Jews say they are the chosen people and they are the goys. The Christians say they are the ones who accept Jesus and are going to heaven and the rest who are going to hell. The Muslims say that they are the believers and the kuffar, the non-believers, which is kind of a derogatory term. But there is something unique in Islam in that the doctrines of Islam spend an extraordinary amount of time being very concerned about those that don't share their faith, right? So, for example, Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. That's why there are only 15 million Jews in the world. There are as many Jews today in the world as there were at the start of the Holocaust, roughly.
Totally.
Okay. Whereas Muslims, in a sense, it's the ultimate successful marketing
That's
strategy
such a good
because
point.
in 1400 years, Charlie, they have nearly 2 billion people. So Islam is successful. Judaism sucks at marketing itself. And so there are many elements within the contents of the doctrines of Islam that make it uniquely dangerous. And again, this doesn't take away from the fact that most Muslims are perfectly nice and sweet and peaceful.
Of
But
course.
where Islam goes, personal liberties
Well,
die.
and think about even within that statement, Doctor said, okay, they're peaceful and sweet because we're comparing them to Western values, and so
Exactly.
if you compare a Muslim to Muslim values, so they're sweet by our standard is what I'm saying, and so
Right.
insofar that they will comply to the Western standard, then fine, of course. But what is a good Muslim? What in a Muslim standard, what does a good Muslim look like?
Well, certainly one, by doctrinally speaking, is certainly one who is working to unify the entire globe under the unifying flag of Allah, right? So that should give shivers down the spine of most people. Look, Egypt used to be fully 100% Coptic Christian country. Fast forward many centuries, it's now 10% Coptic. Lebanon, during my lifetime, when I grew up in Lebanon, was a majority Christian country. Fast forward 45 years, it is a largely Muslim majority country. What happened to the Syrian Christians? What happened to the Iraqi Christians? What happened to the Pakistani Christians? So again, it's not as though Islam always goes into a place and decapitates everyone who's not Muslim. But by one mean or another, once Islam takes a foothold somewhere, then the trajectory is very clear. And so, if we wish to have the United States become an Islamic country, stay with the current open border policies, and in 500 years, we'll all be named Muhammad.
What a smart point that in the Islamic text they spend so much time about people who do not share their values. Christianity spends a fair amount of time on it, but nowhere near Islam, though. It doesn't seem there are like direct calls in Islam of what to do for those that don't believe, and it's a very pernicious preoccupation